That's exactly what happened when China Southern Airlines suddenly decided to get rid of all its Boeing 787 Dreamliners. These jets are among the most advanced in the world. So why would an airline just walk away from them? What could possibly go so wrong with a billion-dollar investment that it would trigger such a drastic decision? The truth is more surprising than you might expect. From hidden design flaws to critical decisions behind closed doors, the real story behind this dramatic exit is finally beginning to surface. And trust us, this is one aviation mystery you don't want to miss. China Southern Airlines, one of Asia's largest and most respected carriers, made a move that shocked the aviation world. Imagine waking up to discover that they had sold off their entire fleet of Boeing 787 Dreamliners. All 10 of them, gone. And the most surprising part? They didn't announce it. There was no press release, no statement, no warning. The planes simply disappeared from flight schedules. It was as if the Dreamliners had never existed in their fleet. This wasn't a minor fleet adjustment. It was a major, high-stakes decision from an airline known for its leadership in the industry. The Boeing 787 had been marketed as a game-changer, sleek, fuel-efficient, environmentally friendly, and perfect for long-haul international routes. Airlines that bought them were betting on the future of aviation. So, why would China Southern, of all companies, quietly abandon such a prized aircraft? No explanation was given, no public comment, just a quiet and complete break from Boeing's Dreamliner program. It left travelers confused. Flights that were supposed to be operated by the Dreamliner were reassigned to other aircraft or temporarily suspended. If you were a regular China Southern passenger, especially on long-haul routes, you probably noticed something strange. And yet, silence. Not a word from the airline. These planes were supposed to represent the future of air travel, but suddenly they weren't in the sky anymore. To those who understand the value and promise of the 787, this wasn't just strange, it was alarming. The Dreamliner had been hyped as Boeing's crown jewel. Built from advanced carbon fiber materials, it was lighter, more fuel-efficient, and quieter than anything that came before it. It promised smoother rides, cleaner engines, and an overall leap forward in flying comfort and safety. But now, China Southern, a leading name in global aviation, had completely turned its back on the aircraft. This wasn't just a business decision. It signaled that something might be very, very wrong. So what happened? What could possibly drive a major airline to walk away from such a significant investment overnight? Behind the scenes, executives at China Southern had grown increasingly concerned. And as they looked deeper into their Dreamliner fleet, they uncovered something that left them stunned and afraid. What they found inside the aircraft wasn't just one issue. It was a series of serious structural flaws hidden beneath the surface, problems no one expected. These weren't minor glitches. They were dangerous weaknesses that put the safety and long-term reliability of the aircraft into question. Most people never even knew the flaws existed because they were so well hidden. But what exactly did China Southern find? What was so serious that it forced them to take such bold and immediate action? Let's take a closer look. The shocking discovery began when experts closely inspected the Dreamliner's fuselage, the very structure that holds the entire aircraft together. What they found was disturbing: rivet holes that had been drilled out of alignment. Now, that might sound like a small issue, but it's not. Think of it like a skyscraper whose steel beams don't line up properly. Over time, the stress builds, cracks appear, and the whole structure can start to fail. That's what was happening inside the Dreamliner. Because it's made of carbon fiber instead of traditional metal, the Dreamliner behaves differently under stress. Metal can sometimes tolerate small flaws, but carbon fiber is far less forgiving. Even tiny misaligned rivet holes can cause structural damage over time. And that's exactly what was happening. Cracks were forming inside the plane where no one could see them. These flaws were hidden deep within the aircraft's structure, especially where the fuselage meets the wings. Every takeoff and landing caused stress on those critical joints. Over time, small cracks began to grow, each flight making the problem worse. And no one on board had any idea. The most dangerous cracks were showing up in key areas, especially where the forward fuselage connected to the center section. This part of the aircraft handles enormous stress during flight. It's like the chassis of a car constantly being pushed to its limits. And here's the terrifying part. If a crack reached a certain size, it could cause a catastrophic failure, sudden and without warning. One moment, the plane could be flying smoothly. The next, its structural integrity could be compromised. That's why China Southern didn't just retire a few planes or slow down their use of the 787. They cut ties completely, quietly, swiftly, decisively. The public still doesn't know the full story. Boeing hasn't commented directly on these issues, and China Southern has remained mostly silent. But what's clear is this: the flaws they found weren't just technical, they were dangerous. And they could change the way the aviation industry views one of its most celebrated aircraft. This story is still unfolding. But one thing is certain: what China Southern discovered inside the Dreamliner may reshape the future of modern air travel. There were no warning lights, no alarms, just a hidden danger lurking deep inside the aircraft. The leaders at China Southern Airlines knew they had a decision to make. Lives were at risk, and they couldn't ignore it. Their Dreamliners were still flying, still taking off and landing every day, while passengers had no idea what threats were hidden beneath the sleek surface of the fuselage. It was like a ticking time bomb inside each plane, completely invisible from the outside. With every flight, the chances of a catastrophe increased. And as the investigation continued, it became clear that the cracks were only the beginning. There were even more serious problems hiding under the surface. This discovery changed everything. The CEO of China Southern understood they could no longer operate these aircraft. Trust in the Dreamliner had been shattered. The damage wasn't just physical, it was reputational and irreversible. But the issues didn't stop with cracks and misaligned rivet holes. As they dug deeper, what they uncovered would send shockwaves through the entire aviation world. One big question remained: how did this happen in the first place? The airline began pulling its Dreamliners from service, but there was yet another, more hidden danger built into the very structure of the plane. Something even more subtle and potentially more devastating. As China Southern's experts continued their deep dive into the 787, they discovered a new issue that made the previous concerns look minor in comparison. It wasn't just about cracks or rivet holes. It was about micro gaps, tiny spaces where parts of the fuselage were joined together. These gaps were nearly invisible, some as small as 0.2 millimeters wide. On their own, they didn't seem like much. But in aviation, even the smallest flaw can become a major threat. These microgaps allowed moisture from the atmosphere to seep in slowly and silently. And once water got inside, the aircraft's carbon fiber body began to weaken. While carbon fiber is known for being strong and lightweight, it's also highly vulnerable to certain conditions, especially prolonged exposure to moisture. Over time, the material began to deteriorate. It was like a dam slowly cracking from water pressure. At first, you wouldn't notice anything, but deep inside the structure, the damage was growing. The adhesive layers bonding the carbon fiber together started to break down. That part of the aircraft, often referred to as the belly, should have been incredibly strong. Instead, it was turning into a fragile shell that looked fine on the outside, but was compromised within. The situation became even more alarming when they realized these micro gaps were forming at the most critical stress points on the aircraft, right where the forward fuselage connected to the middle section. These areas endure the most force during takeoff, cruising, and landing, similar to a bridge under constant heavy traffic. Under such stress, even small weaknesses can become catastrophic. Aircraft structures must never fail mid-air. But as pressure increased, these tiny flaws posed a much larger risk. The internal structure wasn't just weakening, it was essentially rotting from the inside out. Passengers would never notice anything unusual. From the outside, the planes still looked sleek and new. But inside, at the very points that held the aircraft together, the integrity was slowly crumbling. Each flight made the problem worse. Moisture was steadily making its way deeper into the joints, weakening the carbon fiber more and more. The once strong layers of material were beginning to separate. And this wasn't the kind of damage that could be patched up in a maintenance check. It was the kind of structural failure that could cause the fuselage to break apart in flight without warning. These Dreamliners had flown hundreds of thousands of miles, and now this slow, silent breakdown was affecting the entire fleet. This wasn't a minor issue. If left unaddressed, the deterioration could cause a mid-air disaster. The passengers on board would feel safe, unaware that the structure designed to protect them was falling apart from within. And this wasn't the only issue. The discovery of microgaps raised an even bigger concern. What else was being overlooked? What had Boeing rushed, skipped, or missed in their push to get these planes in the sky? As China Southern looked closer, the problems kept getting worse. They could no longer turn a blind eye. Now, all eyes were on them. As the investigation deepened, another major issue came to light: defective parts and a flawed supply chain. The situation wasn't just about structural flaws. China Southern uncovered a pattern of substandard components that somehow slipped past Boeing's quality control checks. The question was, how did these faulty parts even end up on a state-of-the-art aircraft? Boeing's global manufacturing model played a key role. The Dreamliner was a product of international collaboration, with components built in different countries and then shipped to a final assembly site for construction. On paper, this model was supposed to be efficient. In practice, it left room for gaps in oversight and accountability, and those gaps were now becoming clear. At first, Boeing's global production model for the 787 Dreamliner seemed smart and efficient. Components were manufactured around the world and then brought together for final assembly. But what initially looked like a breakthrough turned out to be one of the core reasons why the 787 faced so many issues. There were serious flaws in the supply chain. Oversight was inconsistent, and suppliers often either didn't follow Boeing standards or interpreted them differently. China Southern quickly discovered that some of the most critical safety parts on the aircraft, like fuel valves, pressure monitors, and emergency door latches, were either defective or improperly installed. These weren't minor issues. They were life-threatening. Just imagine a fuel system failing mid-air, or pressure monitors not alerting the crew during a cabin decompression. These are systems that passengers rely on to stay alive. Worse still, many of these faulty components had made it onto the planes without being properly inspected. They had slipped through Boeing's quality control system. During their investigation, China Southern learned that many parts had been self-certified by the suppliers, meaning the suppliers were responsible for confirming their own work met Boeing standards. Boeing didn't verify them independently. As a result, unqualified and defective parts were installed in aircraft. The idea behind self-certification was to save time and money, but it created a dangerous gap in safety and accountability. And it wasn't just the system that was flawed, it was the people using it. As more whistleblowers came forward, disturbing truths emerged about how Boeing had rushed production to meet tight deadlines. Some suppliers skipped crucial safety tests entirely to stay on schedule. Parts that should have undergone rigorous testing for durability and precision were simply pushed through the pipeline. In some cases, documentation was even forged. Test results were falsified, signatures were forged, and untested components were shipped out without any real inspection. It wasn't just isolated mistakes, it was a culture of cutting corners that put human lives at risk. Safety standards were compromised in favor of meeting delivery targets. In the end, sticking to production schedules became more important than ensuring aircraft were safe to fly. Dangerous parts were installed on Dreamliners, putting passengers and crews at risk every time the aircraft left the runway. What China Southern uncovered was terrifying. They had trusted Boeing's reputation for safety. But that trust was built on paper, not reality. Behind the scenes, there was a ticking time bomb in Boeing's global supply chain, and it was only a matter of time before it led to disaster. The fallout from China Southern's decision to withdraw from the Boeing 787 program was immediate and far-reaching. The airline's move rippled through the entire aviation industry. Other carriers operating Dreamliners began re-evaluating their own fleets. News of the flaws sparked widespread concern about the aircraft's safety. Airlines across Asia and Europe grounded their 787s to allow for independent inspections. There was no longer just concern, there was fear. If China Southern's Dreamliners had such severe issues, what about those flying for other airlines? It became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. The integrity of the entire fleet was in question. Trust in Boeing, built over decades, suffered a serious blow. The financial impact was just as staggering. China Southern reportedly lost around $2.4 billion when they abruptly decided to offload all their Dreamliners. That's a huge financial hit for any airline, especially one already managing existing operational challenges. But the damage wasn't just about the money. Boeing had lost more than a deal. It had lost one of its most valuable clients. China Southern wasn't just another customer. It was one of the biggest and most influential airlines in Asia. Losing them sent a clear message to the global aviation industry. Something was seriously wrong with the Dreamliner. Other airlines were watching closely. China Southern's bold decision further eroded confidence in the aircraft. But the consequences didn't stop there. The impact spread across the entire global aviation sector. As more people learned about the 787's defects, airlines began to look for a safer, more dependable alternative. That alternative was the Airbus A350. The A350 gained momentum quickly. It had already earned a strong reputation for reliability and hadn't faced any major technical issues. With confidence in the Dreamliner faltering, the A350 stepped in to fill the gap. Airlines didn't want to risk putting passengers on aircraft with a history of structural and safety issues. As trust in Boeing fell, demand for the Airbus A350 soared. Orders started pouring in, many from carriers that had once stood firmly behind Boeing. The aviation landscape had shifted. If you found this video insightful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to check out the next video on your screen for more fascinating aviation stories.